Chapter 17 The Wakes last Monday in September 1790, links to S2E2 for Jemima's father did come. Many people did. One person she met on the way to Boskednan was George Walgan, riding on his black charger beside his uncle, who declined not to ogle Jemima as Carrie Walgan's nephew slowed and curved beside the friends, calling a greeting to her. "Mr. Walgan, good morning," Jemima called. "I guessed you would be here tomorrow." He ran an eye over each of the 6 young men beside her and then looked back to Jemima, and she introduced them to him, noticing his eyebrow flicker when he mentioned Gregory Watt and Thomas Wedgwood and Master Trevithick. George added, touching his hat, "Let me tell you, I plan to steal Miss Withering back to work at leisure again." There was a microsecond of awkward silence, Dick silent beside Jemima. "The machine will be working tomorrow," Walgan murmured, backtracking to the last time the conversation was moving. "Yes, of course, I would not wish to miss you demonstrate what I am assured to be a magnificent steam engine." His horse's hooves clattered on the thin grass, and he continued, "Sir Francis has invited some of the mine owners to stay at Tehiddy House with him. Many of the miners here will be your miners." "Why will they be your miners, Jemima?" asked Humphrey. Jemima sighed inwardly. There was no keeping it hidden now. "Because Mr. Walgan has offered me a place as his mine captain at Wheel Leisure. Is that not right, sir?" George Walgan nodded, and gave Jemima a small smile. "Indeed. And should circumstances be favorable, mine captain." "Why not?" He tipped his head towards Jemima and then to the 6 men, standing as they were close to the young woman, as if protecting her. "Good." He liked a challenge. "Good to meet you young people, good day." And with that, Walgan wrapped his horse's neck with the reins and he was off. Miss Withering acknowledged George's uncle, and nodded, then followed. "What an extraordinary man!" exclaimed Gregory Watt. "Largest banker in Cornwall," Edward put in. "Sir Francis works hard to keep his own financial interests separate." "He reminds me of Mr. Bolton," Thomas told Gregory. He laughed. "A little perhaps." Dick Trevithick said nothing, just watched in Walgan's wake. "You know, I do know him, Davis, or I think I do. He would come when his father came to my father's dinner. Sir Broken Bar. I was rather young at the time. Here Broken Bar. Here Broken Bar." Davis shook his head. "He wants you for his mine, Jemima." Thomas Wedgwood looked amazed. "I thought you wanted a coal mine?" "Yes," she told him. "I worked in that mine. Mr. Walgan trusted in my work, and is endeavoring to win me back. It was owned by someone else once." "Who did not?" Those who knew, Humphrey, Davis, Edward and Dick, all nodded, knowing what she meant. "One day, I want to own a coal mine, or manage one, anyway." "But you want to stay with us, won't you?" Edward asked her, as they trod the grass over the higher ground, ahead would be the north coast of Cornwall with the sun reflecting off it, and the Ting-Tong mines decked out in whatever a Wakes fair looked like in the Tehiddy district. Jemima looked from the sea to her friend's face. "We have made the engine now. I cannot see that Wild will want me much longer," Jemima told him. "But no, we will need you, Jemima. We can make the engine even more efficient, more high pressure, we can pump more water, and we'll do that quicker with you." Jemima sighed. It was what she hoped. But she also knew it was difficult to get a trusted place, a woman mine engineer. George Walgan believed in her, for one. "It will all depend on the statute fair," she told them as they walked on. "If you get orders, you simply have to make more of what you have. Your mines, Mr. Wild's mines, could not be improved by stratification." Beside her, Thomas Wedgwood's eyes widened. "Stratification?" he repeated. "Why, Jemima, you spoke to that man, Mr. Smith, about just that when you were with us. Do you know, he has written a book about it? He has submitted it to the Royal Institution." "Ha!" exclaimed Humphrey, looking across to Thomas. "I may be meeting him then," and told them all about Thomas Young procuring him for the soft metal extraction demonstration, and Bristol, deferring to Davis Geddy every so often, until they caught sight of 8-pit head winding gear, the chasm in which the Cornish engine that she, Edward and Dick had modelled, and many people. 88,888,888. The first thing Jemima noticed about the wakes was the smell of cooking goose. Every house thereabouts had brought their stubbly goose to Tehiddy for dispatching and cooking, as was the custom, and the smell was indeed encompassing. Other smells rose too, coal, but of course there was always the smell of that horse and the particular smell of cooking. Already, peddlers and traders of nuts, oranges and spiced cake, foods from overseas, having landed at the first tide, were making their wares ready sell for the day, all close to Tehiddy House where the quarterly rents were paid. As they approached, a sign was written as to what would be on. They paused and read it aloud, but by bit, like children in school. Jackass race for a purse of gold, to be rode in true jockey style, and no crossing nor jostling allowed. Thomas began. There are donkeys over there. He pointed. By a food stand a group of about a dozen were tethered, eating from a straw bale. Listen, continued Humphrey, a foot race of a mile carrying a ton of tin ore, for a good hat, that's the prize. He looked on. Lots of ribbons to be danced for by old maids and young men. I want all 6 of my friends to be the young men, declared Jemima. You are the old maid then? Asked Thomas, grinning. His face fell almost immediately when Gregory kicked his leg. Out of order, Thomas, he told him. Sorry, Jemima. Thomas apologized, and did look sorry. Get me a cap and out of this dress and I'll be the 7th young man, Jemima quipped, and pulled aside her skirt to show her work clothes. Clever thing, Edward teased, then looked back to the sign, and other events included chasing a greased pig, grinning through a horse collar, thick porridge eating, and a race for wooden-legged men. That's nothing, grinned Gregory. What? At the Prestwich Wakes, the competitions included an eating match of 3 pounds of treacle and bread and a smoking match for 10 old women. Another notice made Jemima's heart sink, and she made a mental note to find a way of keeping them all away. Notice, it said. On Monday morning at 11 o'clock, the sports will commence with the most ancient, loyal, national, constitutional and lawful diversion, bull baiting, in all its primitive excellence, for which this place has long been noted. The tithes are already being given. Edward pointed to a long line of men outside Tehiddy House. There'll be the goose after. For everyone? Yes, agreed Davis and Humphrey together. I suggest, Davis went on, we look at the steam engine before it all gets started. Then we can take some goose and see what else is happening. My mother sent 18 geese. That's more than enough contribution for us to have a bite. They walked across to Dolcoath, and Edward, Dick and Jemima enjoyed showing Thomas, Gregory, Davis and Humphrey what they had made. Ingenious adaptation. Gregory agreed. My father will not be happy, though. Surely it doesn't matter what happens to the engines once the customer has it? Davis asked, looking at the crossbeam, smaller than the ones he was used to seeing. From what I understand legally, once you possess a thing, whatever you do, even if you use it to make money, this cannot be reclaimed by the seller. True, Gregory conceded. But if a patent is taken out or any form of copyright, then the seller is within their rights to pursue it, providing it is different enough. He looked over it again. I know my father, he is tenacious with the law. Let's not speak of it, but if he changes his mind, all will be better off for it. I for one can't wait to see it working, Humphrey told Jemima. Nor I, agreed Davis. And if she tells you anything different, don't believe Miss Withering, for she suggested we remodel the condenser. She fixed the plate housing, and added no end of joint pieces. It's upside down, isn't it? Gregory said aloud. He had been staring at it for some time. I wondered what was different. He shot a quick look over to Edward Bull. Don't worry, I won't say a word to my father. It's up to him to spot, though he will. It would have helped if the engine had come to us as it should have been. Even with Murdoch's help, we couldn't get it to give more than 20 feet. We all tried. The sun has risen higher now. More people were about, and the refectory where the workers' meals were served had both doors open and the tables arranged. The tenants who had just paid their rents and their families had just sat down to their traditional morning goose feast, and Dick nudged Edward and pointed as a group of miners joined the line. We can go in, All of us, Dick told them. My father is mine captain here at Fortune. Thinking that no one would dare turn Dick Trevithick away, they added themselves to the line and had a hearty breakfast. Considering how much they ate between them, Jemima wondered if all Mrs. Giddy's geese had been accounted for. No, thank you, nonconformists Edward and Dick told one of the servants as alcohol was passed round. Hey, yes please, Davis called as the servant made to go, and he, Gregory, Humphrey and Thomas all had a watered-down canary. But that will be all, for a little while at least. We don't want to get fighting drunk and abandon Jemima. More alcoholic beverages were being offered as prizes for strength and running competitions, and cattle were being brought closer to the food and foods stalls, being perused by potential customers, promises being made to keep hold of a cow here or a pair of chickens there. Will you be wrestling this year? Edward asked Dick. He turned to the rest of them. Unbeaten champion is Master Trevithick. Dick looked at the field where two men had each other in a death grip. Yes, he replied. Later, when the competition thins out, they watched the wrestling for a while, as a man from Redruth defeated one from Hale, and Jemima watched Dick's face, which was wholly fixed on the winner. Miss Withering, came a voice from behind them, before she could ask him anything. The man looked across and added, Master Trevithick. Mr. Bull. It was Drake Carney, the blacksmith, and he smiled across to Jemima. You helped my sister with the cakes yesterday, he explained, looking behind. She is that pleased, Miss Withering, he added, as the young men went with interest to where she was sitting, and Jemima noticed all the baked goods were there, including oatcakes. It was Thomas Wedgwood who shouted with excitement at finding a familiar delicacy at a country fair in Cornwall. He bought 3, and the others 1 each, and shared out Portuguese spiced sausage that Davis had bought from one of the sea merchant traders. They really do go with everything, Gregory agreed. Did you make them, Mistress? Demelza corrected him. No, I did not, nor the Eccles cakes and Dolly cake either. But I did the saffron cakes. It was Jemima. Humphrey told them. Thanks to your mother's cook, Jemima replied modestly, addressing Thomas. They are delicious, Jemima, Edward told her. I've had them from Hanley, Burslem, Trentham. None as good as this. Even Drake Carney had been encouraged to partake and took some sausage slices to eat within the oatcakes. Around them, other stalls were selling treats such as pies, plum cakes, gingerbread, fresh fruits and nuts. They did look good. A loud voice dissipated from a place just beyond the tables. Jemima looked. A man in black clothing and holding a Bible aloft was addressing, very loudly, a small group who had gathered in front of him. That's my father, Drake told her, as Mr. Carney shouted the Bible verses to his select audience. Jemima looked behind her, or Demelza, who gave her a sorry look. Was Cornwall unused to Methodism preached to the four winds? It was common, in the Midlands, especially near where the Wedgwoods lived. Fire and damnation was common enough, and sin and debauchery and the insistence to turn from it. Davis, an Anglican, saw the opportunity to tease the man and called, "Turn to it. Did you say, preacher?" They had gone before the man had worked out where the heckle had come from. I am sorry, Drake continued, who had gone with them. It is how God calls him. It reminds me of the preachers in the Midlands. Where were we, Thomas? Thomas Wedgwood turned his head to Jemima. Near home, I believe. We listened to them outside. The sky was the chapel roof, the wind its walls. And if it might rain, shelters were built, like near the Marquis of Anglesea's mines. Jemima added, "Do you have wakes up country?" asked Drake. Well, dressing, beating the bounds, cheese rolling, but it's all similar. Gregory Watt replied. Do you Cornish not push sacrifices off the cliff? Oh, that was done at sunrise, Edward told them, caustically. The Druids got up and pulled a virgin from his bed, but you weren't there, Gregory. The other man thumped him hard on the arm and they laughed. Drake drifted away from them, tempted by a forging competition, and they saw more events about. Now fed, people were interested in competitors, and Jemima saw men's blindfolded wheelbarrow races, smock races for women, hot hasty pudding eating contests, pigeon flying, chasing a greased pig and cow milking. There were sack races and even a grinning competiton where the competitor had to grin through a horse collar, the grinner considered the funniest one. A flock of girls chattered by, attracted by the ribbons and laces stalls, of which there were many. They looked across to them and chattered and giggled like hens. My sisters, Dick told them as they all watched the girls pass by, Emma, Penelope, Kitty, Hebe and Matilda. He picked them out. All looked like him. Broad-faced, dark-eyed, but one, who was fair-haired like the other 5 girls just behind them. And they are my cousins, my mother and their mother are sisters-in-law. And your uncle? Asked Davis. He died shortly after Ruth was born. I know them, Humphrey said, suddenly. My sisters had the same governess as Ruth Teague. So your cousins are, Faith, Hope, Joan, Patience, Ruth. Dick nodded, and then nodded to his cousins. The youngest was pointing over to Jemima and whispering something to the sister next to her. Would you wish to be introduced? Dick asked, suddenly. Only if you wish it, Jemima told him. Or we could go to look at Murdoch's steam carriage. They all turned at that and, beside the head here of Ishmael's mine, the steam carriage that Jemima had driven a few nights before. In the autumn sunlight it looked magnificent, wooden carriage top with brass and iron cogs, like a big clock. At the back, the coal tender eating shovelfuls of the black diamonds. The steam valve was attached to an overhead lever, which in turn was attached to another that was attached to the cogs. These were attached by further axles that powered the wheels. Murdoch was offering rides at the front, where a bench had been placed, and they were about to go over when Thomas hissed, Gregory, your father. And it was James Watt had stopped the carriage and was speaking sharply to William Murdoch, his frame moving sharply as he spoke. Hold up, Murdoch, called another man and, beside Watt, Josiah Wedgwood stood beside him. Thomas's father looked as if he were trying to stop Gregory's father killing William Murdoch. He had the man by the lapels now and was shouting something at him, though what, none could hear because of the direction of the wind. Behind them, another group of young men stood, both miners from Logan, both not quite sober, having indulged in ale and cider already, and it wasn't even 11 o'clock. One, the taller of the two and skinnier with greasy brown hair, pointed to Jemima, standing between Davis and Dick. You know that girl? He hissed. The other, shorter, round of face and fair hair, shook his head. I bet I can get her on her own. Hey, he hissed. Hey, lady. Jemima turned, glad to not be looking at the conflict between the two engineers. Come here, I have something you would like to see. Jemima took a few steps from Trevithick, then gasped as the other took her arm. Hey, I said I would get her. The first man protested and Jemima tried to wrestle from the man's grip. She kicked out, but the second man locked her foot and tried to force her hand inside his breeches. Jemima pulled away and shouted for them to let go. Trevithick and Gregory got the first, as the man, still holding her arm, leered at them. She is with us, Gregory warned. I bet she is, the fair-haired man retorted. Dick kicked his wrist and he let Jemima go. You all right, Jemima? Thomas Wedgwood was beside her now, putting out a hand to help her up. All right, she nodded, as Davis put a hand on her back. They looked at them. Gregory had the dark-haired man in a headlock and the fair-haired man who had attacked Jemima had been taken by the shoulder. He gripped the man tightly. I do say, he began, and punched him in the face to the rhythm of his words. She is with us. The man tumbled to the ground and backed away. The other man helped him up. Dick Trevithick made to go after them. "It's not wrestling time yet, Dick," Edward told him with a laugh in his voice, hoping to lighten the mood. A hand firmly on his arm. "They're from Logan," a voice came from beside them. It was Drake Carney again, and he watched the men leave and break into a bawdy song, gesturing in time with it so that Jemima could hear. "I come from there," Drake added. "Why do you think I like to live here?" "You fought them, Jemima." "You were fighting them." Thomas Wedgwood's eyes were wide. "Yes," Jemima replied. "There was no talking to them, was there?" "Oh, I say," Davis told them, as they left the still ongoing argument between Murdoch and Watt and went across to where many chapmen and itinerant peddlers were selling things made of twisted iron. and earthenware bowls, plates and cups and bowls of blackberries. He slipped his arm in Jemima's for a moment and leaned to her ear. "Everything well?" "Yes," nodded Jemima. "Please don't tell my father," she added. Davis squeezed her arm and smiled. "Do you think we don't all want you out in our company again, Jemima?" he asked, before squeezing her arm again, then letting go and examining the blackberries. "Were they picked before Sunday?" asked a woman, dark blue hat and dress to match. The little woman selling the berries nodded. "Good, because they would be sour otherwise. Don't you know of the legend, brother of the devil? Pissing on all them, you mean? They're sour because of the acid levels in them changing because of the season," Humphrey hissed to Jemima. "They don't seem to know that, do they?" She laughed, but then curtailed it because Davis gave a cry of welcome. "This is Mr. Henry Harvey," he introduced. The tall, fair-haired man nodded. Jemima had heard of Mr. Harvey, something to do with boat building, and Henry was looking to follow. Miss Jane, his sister, the snooty girl who had questioned the blackberries, also nodded. "Henry blew it, you know," Davis told Humphrey. "My guardian knows your brother. He was co-investor at Wheel Leisure." And both Henrys began to talk to Dick about the engine, and Humphrey about mining. "You told me to avoid Dick Trevithick at all costs in your letter," Jemima whispered to Davis, partly because she'd been meaning to ask him, but partly because she didn't want the woman to talk to her. After the scuffle her brain wasn't in the right place to remember to be lady. "Oh, I did think so," Davis told her, "from his time at school, lazy, opinionated, spoiled." He glanced to Dick as he pointed out the engine, "But I am delighted to say I am completely disabused of that opinion. Having been writing to him for the last 18 months about the engine, he never told me his name. He wanted my advice, as a lawyer and a Cornishman, about the engine. I came down here yesterday morning before the service St. Earths and looked over the engine with him, not knowing that he was the same man who, as a boy, would gaze at a piece of paper and write nothing, or had brought in something Crawley from the gardens and let it go in the classroom." The rest of them were listening to Dick now, except for the young lady, not much older than Jemima, she surmised, who had been waiting to put into the conversation and who had been getting rather annoyed about waiting. As soon as Davis had stopped speaking, Jane Harvey looked to Jemima. "Are you enjoying visiting Cornwall, Miss Withering?" Her voice was soft, tinged with sourness. "I am a native of Cornwall, Miss Dresser Broken Bar Miss," she corrected Jemima, then looked about her. "All these people, I do wonder, they must save up all year for this." "They do, Jemima told her. "The wakes are all over the country, and it is not seemly for anyone not to be generous, not to be hospitable. Even now, my friend Davis's family is hosting the renowned James Watt, is that not right, Gregory?" Gregory Watt turned from the detailed conversation about pressure vessels. "Indeed, Miss Withering." Gregory smiled. "A broken bar and Mr. Wedgwood," she nodded across to them. "Queensware is your father's new line, is it not, Thomas?" "Yes, Jemima," Thomas Wedgwood agreed, enthusiastically. "And the prohibition of slavery." "I still wonder why Sir Francis don't stop these wakes," Miss Harvey added, moodily. "Stop them? Does he want a riot in his hands?" Jemima replied, then added in her head, "And just why are you here if you disapprove so, Miss Harvey?" "Oh yes, Sir Francis," Edward joined in, half listening to the conversation. "Sir Francis has 10 wassail cups that were used this morning with his tenants. Since the Puritans decided such cups were potpourri, he changed when they to be used. By now, others girls had floated over, relatives of Dick Trevithick." "Introduce us, Dick," begged the younger sister, Matilda, who looked at Jemima and added, "Would you come with us, miss? We are to look at 10 silks and satins." "I do, thank you," Jemima replied, "but I am not that particular in fabrics and dresses." "The Hatters, then?" Matilda Trevithick pressed. "All the way from London?" "Will you go away?" Dick told them in a bored voice. "Miss Withering is with me, and we are looking at the machinery." He glanced past his younger sister and they lit on the face of Jane Harvey. "Will perhaps Miss Harvey go with you?" She saw Dick move his head. "Doesn't she talk strangely?" "Doesn't like dresses and silks," Matilda said to one of her sisters. "You don't, really?" do you?" Davis chipped in. He was next to Humphrey, who was examining herbs and spices on a stall beside them. Jemima thought she must thank Nice for those he had brought for her. After the one day, which Dick had helped her with, it had stemmed off. Jemima was looking forward to seeing what happened next month. "I thank your mother for trying to teach me cooking," she told Thomas. "I can just about manage that." "What will you do when you marry?" She turned to look at the face of Henry Harvey's sister. She was still there, having not, apparently, gone off with Dick's sister to inspect ribbons. "Miss Harvey?" Jemima was too impatient for this gaggling of sisters to finish. "Well, you need some skill." "Why would I?" Jemima replied. "I work, I earn my own living." "A gentlewoman, who works?" Jane Harvey asked, aghast. "It would seem so," Jemima replied. "But when you marry, your husband will work and you will have a house to keep. And, you will be wholly dependent on him." Jemima shook her head. "I have no plans to marry, Ms. Harvey, so I will have no need to worry about fine dressing, especially in my work, which is mining." Heaven help her, why wouldn't this woman go away? Jemima thought. Mining, engineering, manufacturing. I can read, write, carry out arithmetic, calculus, a broken bar. I am as able as any man. She is, Dick told her. We could not have made the engine without her. And you spoke so wonderfully, so persuasive, Blewett said. I was waiting for my brother. You are a broken bar spellbinding. Had Captain Poldark not arrived then, I swear Wheel Leisure would be pulling out its copper by now. That did it. Her friends had extolled her skills, and they were equal in their eyes to ribbons and lace. Their opinion was all that mattered to Jemima. Charmed to meet you, Miss Withering, Jemima told her. She was swept up by the ribbon-hunting flock of girls and young ladies, who bid noisy parting greetings to their brother. A noise a little way off, of animals in torment, sounded like the bull baiting had started, and was grateful when Gregory told her, "We are going to watch the wrestling, will you come?" "Yes," agreed Jemima. Already, Dick Trevithick had begun to walk to the field where he had watched some of the wrestlers that morning. "Time to join in yet?" Edward asked, as Dick surveyed the men in the field. "Who will join in?" he asked. "I will," Gregory told him. "I will," said Humphrey. "You won't." Davis laughed. "You're too young yet," but broke off as Dick Trevithick marched onto the field. One of the organizers, who evidently had not seen him, followed Dick to the center of the field. Dick ignored him and bellowed, "I am undefeated, who will challenge me?" When no one came forward, Trevithick began to stalk about, looking for a competitor. Jemima thought she had found one in Tom Harry. His face was bruised, and to Jemima it looked like the damage had been caused by a left-handed man hitting him in the face. She looked across to Dick, who was stalking around with his left hand higher than his right, his leading hand. Did he know? He had been insistent in being protective of her the day after, and that day, and several other times. Now she thought of it. Beside them, Richard Duncan had arrived, and was greeting Humphrey heartily. He nodded to Jemima before striding away, a woman beside him. He would have benefited from the copper, Jemima knew, for he had been imprisoned for debt. Who was the lady? Back from London for a few days, his sister, Mary, Mistress Uppy now. Jemima's face looked blank. "Uppy? John Uppy?" Davis asked Jemima. "The artist." He was just there, drawing the scene. And while Dick pushed a lovely man into the ground, Davis acquainted Jemima of other names from Cornwall. Samuel Foote, the playwright, who knows David Garrick, who knows Dr. Darwin. A broken bar. Henry Bone is also his friend. A broken bar. He is in London. Miniatures. We have several of his. If the familiar broken bar. Miss Withering. Through a crowd that was building up around the field where Dick Trevithick was laying flat challenger after challenger, Drake Carney pushed his way through. Davis nodded when he got closer, the memory of earlier still in his mind. So he told them of the plan that he had heard, that the Logan miners were planning to break the steam engine, put it beyond repair, destroy it. "Our thanks for telling us this," Edward Bull told him. "It must have been difficult. Only I work for Lord Bassett, and it is his engine." They watched a little more, and waiting until Drake had drifted away, Edward whispered to Davis, When Dick has finished we will tell him we will guard the engine throughout the night. That will make the Wakes live up to their name." "All of us?" Davis asked, as a cheer went up from the spectators. Another competitor must have arrived. "We can take it in turns to sleep," he told them. They moved forward to see who it was who had challenged Dick and at once saw it was the squat, blonde-haired man who had grabbed Jemima. Beside them, Drake Carney had found them again. "Oh no," Drake told them. "His name is Lud. He is a terrorizer in Logan." But it was this man was who Dick had been waiting for. His eyes narrowed and he became more hunchbacked, more determined to fight as Lud raised his fists. They clashed hands, as it was clear that Lud wanted to fight too, and after a call of no boxing, they began trying to grab one another. After a few slip grips, where the competitors lost their handholds, Dick managed to get Lud gripped round the waist. But Lud was cunning and was going into the wrestle, hands pulling at Dick's clothes, and managed to topple him a little. When he turned, it was clear he was hanging on to Dick by the calves. A whistle blew and the organizer made them come apart. They flew at one another again. Dick was close to his head, and he bit something. Lud screamed, but held on longer. Dick launched his forehead at Lud, who toppled back, unconscious to calls of outrage from other Logan miners at the contravention of rules. To give him his due, Dick Trevithick had won, but the organizer got Lud to sit up before calling Dick the undisputed champion, who not only did not have to pay to compete, being champion last year, but won a few coins and, more importantly, the title. The Logan miners were still not happy, but there were plenty of people buffering Dick's way back to the group. "I am leaving, daughter," came an unexpected but familiar voice by Jemima's ear. She turned, and there was her father, smiling at her. "Father!" she exclaimed, guilt lying in her stomach having not thought to look for him the whole day. "I am sorry I did not see you."